Everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss some of the lower respiratory organs and their structures and their functions. So, before we get into the lungs, let's first talk about the trachea. So, the trachea, as you can see here, here's the lumen, by the way, here's the hole. This is the hole that the air is going to travel through, right? You can see that it is hyaline cartilage, so it is a cartilage structure which is really important, right? This is something that a lot of times we overlook. It kind of looks like plastic, right? It's like a plastic tube in your throat, right? So this cartilage is super important because it helps maintain the structure of the trachea, meaning it keeps this hole open. As we learn later on, when it comes to breathing, there are different partial pressures of the air which help us to essentially suck air into the lungs, right? So, with that said, because of that pressure differential, if we did not have this cartilage, this hole would just shut. Not always, but it would just shut. And if that happens, that's very scary because then now air can't get in, right? And you can only last a few minutes without oxygen. So, it's very important that we have that cartilage. And then on the inside, you can see the epithelial tissue, right? So, this epithelial tissue is going to line the inside of it. It has a variety of functions, such as helping make sure that any debris that comes in gets trapped so we can cough it up. That's kind of nice. You don't want to just breathe in anything and let it get into your lungs. But it can also get inflamed, right? So if you have asthma, sometimes that can get inflamed. And if that gets inflamed, it makes the hole smaller and a little more difficult to breathe. So with that said, your trachea, it's up here on this image on the right hand side, upper right hand side. So this trachea, again, air is going to come in on the top. We already talked about the larynx. So we pass the larynx, we go down the trachea, and eventually, here's the bottom right hand picture. Go from the larynx down the trachea. It's going to branch out into two lungs. And these branches are called bronchus or bronchi. So the bronchi are going to be the tubes that extend off of the trachea. So we can send air into both the left and right lungs. From there, those bronchi are going to keep on breaking down into smaller and smaller bronchi. So, in other words, the air is just going to continually move and branch out throughout the lungs to get air all throughout the lungs, which is really important, right? So, the more surface area, the better off it is for actually getting oxygen into our bloodstream. So, these are some really important terms to go with the lungs, trachea, the bronchi, and the additional bronchi. The very first and largest bronchi, by the way, is called the primary bronchus. And then the ones that branch off that are secondary and then tertiary, right? So we just keep going as they get smaller. As you continue down to the smallest level, we are going to get to right here, which are known as the alveoli, right? These little grape-like looking structures. And the alveoli is where all the diffusion happens. This is where oxygen and CO2 go in and out. This is where they diffuse. So, in other words, all that air goes down the trachea, down the bronchus, and it just keeps on traveling down until eventually it gets to these really small structures known as the alveoli. So, alveoli. If you take a look at these guys, again, you could even see here this bronchiole. The air is going to travel down until it reaches the alveoli. And these little alveolar sacs are super, super small and extremely thin. Not only thin, but you can see in this image in the upper right corner, very porous. Why is this important? Because the air can travel into here and through. Where's the air going to go to? Well, if we remember, what carries air throughout the body? Our blood cells, our red blood cells. So what's going to carry our oxygen? The red blood cells. Where are the red blood cells? That's a whole other system, right? The cardiovascular system, circulatory system. Well, if we know anything about our circulatory system, it starts off in the arteries, and then it gets into smaller and smaller and smaller blood vessels known as capillaries. And if you look at these images, you can see Each alveoli is covered in capillaries. So now the oxygen and CO2 can travel between the alveoli and the capillaries. This way, CO2 can exit the blood and go back up and out, and oxygen can go in to the blood from the air that you just breathed in and into your bloodstream. If you have any questions about any of this so far, here's another image, by the way, of that bronchial tree as it continues to branch out into smaller parts. If you have any questions about any of this so far, please let me know.